Okay, great to see so many of you here with us today. We're still awaiting for our opening comments speaker to arrive, just having, I think, some technical issues here. But I think just in the interest of time, let's get started with housekeeping and make sure everybody knows how to make use of the Zoom platform. And then when our esteemed colleague from the Rwanda Stock Exchange joins, we will come back and do opening remarks. Again, thanks to everyone who's introducing themselves in the chat box. It's great to hear from all of you. Please do make use of that chat box to introduce yourself, give any comments that you'd like to in that chat box. Now, as I said, I'm going to do a little skip past the welcome remarks, but we will come back to that when Pierre does join us. Great. So what we're all here to talk about today, we're here for a workshop on gender equality and global markets. This is part one of a two-part workshop. So we do hope that you all join us again, same time, same place, on Wednesday of this week, so in 2 days' time. But in part one, we're looking at covering understanding complexity through preparation and alignment to standards for gender equality. Oops, sorry. Great. So a few housekeeping issues before we dive into the content. First and foremost, we do have 2 hours together today. We have another 2 hours together on Wednesday. And in both our sessions, we have live Q&A throughout. So if you do want to ask any questions throughout our training, you can feel welcome to do so. We do expect you to participate today. This is not a sit back, do some emails type of workshop. We want you to be engaged, to be learning, and not only to be commenting and asking questions, but also participating in our activities. So do please feel inclined to participate and engage. And as a reward, we will give you a certificate at the end. We'll share with you how to get that certificate at the end of our training, but you do have to join both sessions. So we'll give you a feedback survey at the end of next session. And if you fill in that feedback survey, we will then give you a certificate. And that certificate is certified by CPT, and you get 4 CPD credits for it. Now, how to participate. We will be using different mechanisms of interaction, but one of them that you can use at any time is that Q&A box. So you can see highlighted in yellow Q&A, and that's where you can ask any of your questions. We ask you to ask the questions in that particular place because it tracks it for us. So we make sure that we have to answer those questions because they're held right there for us, and they stay there until we answer them. If you put your questions in the chat box, we might miss them because other people are talking, and the fluctuation of people giving comments might lose that question up in the chat. So please do ask all your questions in the Q&A box. Now, there's a few of us here with you today to facilitate this training. I just want to quickly introduce all of us to you. So just to let you know, from the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, oh, that went a little too quickly. I'm going to go back now just to that one. Is myself. I'm the Academy Head at the SSE. My name's Tiffany Grabsky, and I'm so pleased to be with all of you today to discuss this very important topic. I'm also very pleased to be joined with my colleague Landon Wilcock, who's our project officer, and also leading this gender equality training program. Now, I think, yeah, Landon, we have the old slide deck, unfortunately. Sorry, Maya. So Anna was with us for our last session, but Anna's not with us for this session. We actually have Maya with us. So Maya, thanks. She just turned on her camera so you can see what she actually looks like, not like the picture on your screen. Sorry about that, Maya. But we are very pleased to have Maya with us today. Maya is working at the Women's Empowerment Principles as well at UN Women. And she's a project officer there. And she also holds a master's degree in gender studies and a bachelor's degree in social work from Stockholm University. So we're in very good hands here with Maya. Thanks so much for being with us, Maya, and for adding your expertise to our training today.
Thank you.
And we do have a guest speaker with us today as well. So near the end of our session, we're going to discuss gender equality indices. And we're so lucky to have with us to speak about this a real expert on that topic. So Harry Agambar is going to join us at the end of our training today. And he is an ESG specialist at Bloomberg. And he works on the team responsible for the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. And prior to this, he also worked in the impact investment space as an analyst. So very pleased to have Harry with us a little bit later today too. Now it looks like we don't quite have Pierre here yet. Let me just quickly double check that we didn't receive an email of distress as to what's going on. No, nothing yet. So I think I'm going to dive right into the content. And then as we move on, we might come back to Pierre to open us up a bit later. But let's look at what we're learning today. And so to get started, gender equality can be sometimes a complex topic. And I think as you go through this topic with us today, you may agree with us that it can be very complex. But what we're trying to do in this training is really break down that complexity and make it quite clear how we can move forward with a kind of step-by-step process. So we've broken our training into 4 modules or 4 steps that you can look at taking. The first one is our prepare module. Now in the prepare module, we're looking to build a kind of solid foundation of understanding of what is gender equality. And we'll do that through looking at different areas of the landscape of gender equality, the purpose of even looking at gender equality, and the language that we're using when we're talking about gender equality and diversity and inclusion a little bit more broadly. Then we'll move into our next module, our align module. And here we're looking at how you can align your practices to certain global principles, local requirements, and peer practices that will help you to guide this progress and make sure that you're constantly moving forward and constantly enhancing your gender equality in your organization. That's what we're going to cover today in the 2 hours we're here together today. Then what we'll do is on Wednesday, we'll continue that process and we'll look at the implement module where we're going to capture value through gender lens market. Did I just hear Pierre pop up? I think so.
Yes, yes. It's me. Thank you.
Hi, Pierre. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, I had a small issue with training. You know,
no problem.
The connectivity we had does not give me the option. So I had to go in as me now, you know, so that's what happened actually just now.
No problem. Yeah. Well, we're always happy to have you with us, Pierre. We let everyone know that there was just a small technical issue and that we would get you here as soon as possible. So I'm just going to move us back a few slides here. I'm nearly there where we have a slide to introduce you. Oh, I think I went one too far. So it might go. Oh, no, it's good. Great. Oh, no, it's gone too far. Great. So here we are. Thank you so much, Pierre, for joining us. For all of those who don't know, Pierre Celestin Robokumba is the president of the African Securities Exchange Association and the chief executive officer of the Rwanda Stock Exchange and a longtime partner of the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. So we're so pleased to have you here with us, Pierre, and I'm going to pass to you to kick us off before we dive into the rest of the content today.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. We don't now though, Pierre. Your camera and your microphone both went off. We'll just give Pierre a moment to turn on his camera and his microphone again and apologize to everyone for our technical glitches today. Oh, we see you now,
Hello?
Pierre.
Yes.
We hear you now too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the technical issues here. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this important training workshop on gender equality and the global market. Today, we gather here as a diverse group of individuals united by a common goal. Understand why action is needed for enhanced gender equality in corporations. Identify what tools can be used to improve gender equality in your organization. Understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance. Identify how and where to communicate gender-related information to investors. I would like to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to the UN SEC, the International Financial Corporation, and the UN Women for organizing this workshop. Your collaboration in bringing us together for this vital cause is commendable, and we appreciate the hard work and dedication that has gone into making this event a reality. As we embark on this journey together, let us reflect on the significance of gender equality. It's not just a fundamental human right, but a crucial foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. When we empower women and promote equal opportunities for all genders, we unlock the potential of entire communities, leading to enhanced economic growth and social development. Throughout this workshop, we will explore various aspects of gender equality within the context of the global markets. We will engage in discussions, share insights, and develop strategies that can be implemented in our respective fields. Our esteemed speakers and facilitators are here to guide us through this process, providing valuable knowledge that we can take back to our organizations and communities. I encourage each of you to actively participate, share experiences, and connect with one another. It is through collaboration and open dialogue that we can create a more equitable future. Let us challenge the status quo, break down barriers, and work together to ensure that everyone, regardless of gender, has the opportunity to thrive in a global market. Thank you once again to the UN SEC, the IFC, and UN Women for your exceptional work and collaboration. Thank you all for being here today, for your commitment to this cause, and for your willingness to learn and grow together. We can make a meaningful impact. So let's get started. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us and those great words to get started. Indeed, we do hope everyone actively participates, and I think that was a great way to get them started. Thank you, Pierre, and thank you to your exchange for hosting this training today.
Sure, thank you very much.
To get us started, I'm actually going to move to one of our interactive tools called Mentimeter. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and you should be able to see a QR code on the bottom left-hand side of that screen. You can use that QR code, just take your phone and point the camera at that QR code, and that will open up on your phone a way to interact and answer these questions. However, if you can't use your phone or you'd rather do it on your computer, you can open a new browser and use the link that Landon's sharing in the chat. Or you can just go to www.menti.com, as you can see at the top of your screen there, and then use the code 72553063, as you can see at the top of your screen there, to join and answer those questions. We'll give you all a moment to start answering them, but this is just to get a sense of what your current level of comfort is with this topic. So are you not very confident or comfortable at all with these particular objectives, or are you very confident or comfortable with these objectives? The first being your knowledge of gender equality and global markets. The second being how comfortable you are in discussing this topic with others. And the third being how comfortable you are with taking action to improve gender equality in your organization. Now, the first person who filled this in was very comfortable with all of these. So we hope to hear from you. If we do have any experts on this topic on the webinar today, please do share your comments and your experience with the rest of the participants. Now, we also had someone just fill it in and be, not very confident at all in their knowledge of gender equality and global markets together. So we hope to improve that knowledge for you over the course of today and our next workshop on Wednesday. And it looks like we have a little bit of everything in between. But generally, people have, a pretty middle to high level of comfort with discussing this topic, which is really fantastic. By discussing it is how we can improve, and then taking action. A lot of you feel quite comfortable taking action. So we just need to improve that knowledge and make sure you know what to talk about and what action to take. We only have 12 of you that have filled it out. So if you're having any trouble accessing the Menti, please just let us know and we'll help you figure that out. You can just type it in the chat. Great. So I think with that, I'll stop sharing, Landon, and you can take over and put the slide deck up again. And I'll actually pass to you to kick us off with our first unit.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany. And apologies. Thanks so much, Tiffany. 1 second here as please excuse some technical difficulties, but okay. Okay. Sorry, folks. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so sorry about that, everyone. Apologies for some technical difficulties today. But now let's move and shift gears and let's have a look together at how gender connects to finance. So we have three main sections in each unit, narrowing into the topic a bit more with each unit. So we'll start by looking at what the case for action is, and then we'll narrow in a little bit more and look at some market trends. And for this unit, we'll look specifically at how markets are doing in terms of gender equality progress. In the final section, we'll home in on some terminology that will help us communicate about gender equality. So with the first section, with prepare, we'll look at why does gender matter? So to get started, it's important to highlight that equality between genders is indeed a human right. It's widely documented that women and girls experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and often disproportionately. They also face additional barriers in seeking access to effective remedies. Moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently by business activities depending on their age, color, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, language, literacy, access to economic resources, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, residence in a rural location, and based on how their migration, indigenous or minority status all interact. So, that's a long list of aspects that can influence how someone is treated. But what that all says is that this is a very complex and interconnected topic. So the document you see on your screen now is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, also known as the UNGPs, which are the global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse human rights impacts. We've flagged this on this slide, a few of the principles, 14, 16, 20, and 21, to help understand the obligations that businesses have. So the first principle we highlight at the top is number 14, which indicates that the responsibility of business enterprises to respect human rights applies to all enterprises, regardless of their size, sector, operational context, ownership, and structure. The second principle we highlight here is number 16, which encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet the human rights responsibilities through a statement of policy that should have certain characteristics. You can read more about this in the document on your screen, and we'll also share some resources in the chat, but we do highly recommend taking a look at it if you have not already familiarized yourself with this publication. Another principle we wanted to flag is number 20, which highlights that in order to verify whether adverse human rights impacts are being addressed, businesses should track the effectiveness of their response by using sex disaggregated data collected in line with a human rights-based approach and outcome indicators developed in consultation with affected people and gender experts. We'll be discussing this a bit more in detail in part 2 in our communications module, but it's important also to recognize that even if the data is not made public, it's still important to disaggregate the data so you can make better decisions internally and identify any issues as they arise. Lastly, Principle 21, which particularly highlights the important role of communication. According to this principle, businesses should be prepared to communicate externally, particularly when concerns are raised by or on behalf of affected stakeholders. Business enterprises should communicate adequately and easily accessible information to the affected stakeholders regularly. Both information and the means of communication should be responsive to gender discrimination and the differentiated impacts experienced by women and girls. What's important to consider from a financial perspective is that in addition to being the right thing to do and having a positive impact on society, organizations should be considering the repercussions associated with violating the human rights of employees, partners, and stakeholders. Policy or legal risk and reputational risks are very important risks to be considering for gender equality and social related disclosures as well. Now, we look now at the 2030 agenda. So it's also important to note that the sustainable development depends on equality of genders. You may recognize from the image here as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or commonly known as the SDGs. Gender equality is on its own. It's as one of the 17 SDGs agreed to by UN member states, but it also contributes to all other SDGs. So the SDGs represent an ambitious attempt to end poverty, protect the planet, improve the lives and well-being of all humanity. And SDG 5 focuses specifically on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, but aspects of gender equality appear in the targets and associated indicators of 10 out of the 17 SDGs. If you'd like to look more at how gender equality links to the different SDGs, you can have a look at Annex 3 of the SSE guidance on gender equality for exchanges. So, what exactly does improving gender equality do for society? There's a multitude of aspects here, so we'll start with a few. For the first one, violence in society decreases. Studies have shown that when we have more equality of genders in society, we also see lower levels of violence, greater economic productivity, and increased resilience against financial and environmental crises. I want to remind you that by gender equality, don't want to imply more women than men, but equality means that both women and men are represented, have the same level of power, and are both heard and understood equally. However, to achieve equality, in many cases, we need to provide extra support to the less represented gender, which in many cases today is women. To give you an example of the extent of impact that gender inequality currently has on society, a study by the World Bank estimates the loss in human capital wealth due to gender inequality at over 160 trillion. Another study concluded that the equal participation of men and women entrepreneurs could boost global GDP by approximately 3 to 6%. And to read more about this, I recommend clicking on the links in this slide in your handout, which I believe Tiffany has reshared. Now, in terms of benefits, by promoting gender equality of both genders has been found to have positive social, environmental, economic, and business benefits. If we narrow a bit deeper into the benefits that companies can find from enhancing equality in their organizations, you can see a number of things. First, companies with higher levels of diversity, both gender and ethnic at the executive level, are found to show higher performance than their less diverse counterparts on both profitability and long-term value creation measures. Different genders have different attitudes towards risk. So if our decision makers, for example, board and leadership team, are gender diverse across an organization and programs, this can lead to more balanced decision-making processes. Different genders also experience the world differently and have their unique lived experiences, and therefore have different views and ideas that they can bring to a table. Companies with workplace policies that support and promote gender equality are better able to attract and retain talent, and gender lens investing mandated investments globally increased from 100 million to 2.4 billion between 2014 and 2018. Finally, companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams demonstrate better environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG performance, including having more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and workforce policies, and stronger community relations. So now let's look at just one of the many studies on this topic to see a bit more detail about the benefits that diverse companies are seeing. So this data comes from a study by FP Analytics, an independent research and advisory division of foreign policy. So this study looked particularly at industries that are traditionally male-dominated, analyzing over 2,300 publicly listed companies around the world and more than 160 in-depth one-on-one interviews and follow-up surveys. So the study finds that companies with more women on their board have on average a higher profit, greater transparency, and higher social ratings. So we'll look at those three statistics now. First, profitability. The study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women in management were on average 47% more profitable than those with the lowest. These findings are consistent with other evidence that promoting gender diversity can benefit a business's bottom line. So a study by the ILO, or International Labor Organization, women interviewed for the study detailed how they are leading their organizations on new revenue generating paths, advancing innovation in inertia-prone industries, advocating for harm-reducing practices, and increasing transparency to build stakeholder trust. The second piece, transparency. So building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees, consumers, regulators, and investors, is vital for legacy industries that are working to evolve their business models, improve regulatory compliance and performance, and respond to consumers' changing needs. The study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women on boards are more transparent in terms of ESG information disclosure. In particular, companies with at least one woman on the board are 17% more transparent than those with no female board members. Finally, on CSR, the analysis found a positive correlation between gender diversity on corporate boards and companies' social responsibility performance. Women interviewed for this study provided numerous firsthand accounts of their efforts to protect safety and labor rights, integrate community development into business strategy, build local capacity, and empower women. So we discussed a few slides ago that diversity and importantly, equality can have important societal and environmental impacts. Another interesting aspect of this same study was that equality not only had an impact within the company, but also for the environment where it operates. For example, more diverse boards were 39% more likely to reduce emissions, they were 46% more water efficient, and they were 60% more energy efficient than their peers with less diverse boards. So in your handout, you can find a couple more slides and studies if you'd like to dive a bit deeper into this. We'll also share in the chat a recent publication that came from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders. So here, I'll turn it back to Tiffany to take us forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Landon. And hopefully that kind of set the scene for everyone as to why we're even discussing this topic. And someone had mentioned they like those resources. They are all in your slide deck that's on that website that we're sharing. So you might want to download that slide deck after today's session and have a look at those resources, which are really useful. Now, next, let's look at the landscape. Where are we and where are we moving towards? We're gonna, in this unit of this module, look at the state of the market. Now, before we dive into the data, we're gonna come back to all of you, make you think for a moment. So I'm gonna share again this Mentimeter, and I'm gonna move it to the next question. Now, this one asks you, on our current trajectory, how we're doing so far, in how many years will the world achieve gender equality? Whatever you think gender equality means. So just as a reminder, you can access that Menti either in the same screen you already had open. So if you already opened the Menti on your phone, for example, just go back to that browser that you had open on your phone. If you had it open on your computer, you can open that browser again. And it should have shifted to a new question. You might have to refresh it. If it's not working for you, just start again. Take your phone, point it at the QR code there on the screen. Maybe type in the code again from the start, or use the link, and Landon can share that link in the chat for you all. I see 2 people have managed to access it, but we had nearly 30 of you figure out the Menti for the last question. So I'm going to give you a bit of time just to make your guesses on how long you think it will be until the world achieves gender equality. Now, this is a number of years. I think it's in increments of 5 or 10. Sorry, I can't remember what the increments are here. So it's kind of hard to guess where we're at, but you're all guessing different numbers, except for 2 of you guessed the same number here. So I'm going to guess that's about 250 in the middle. So it looks like you're looking at like 50. A couple of you think in 50 years, we're going to have gender equality. A lot of this grouping we see here means most of you really genuinely think we're going to achieve gender equality in our lifetime, at least, in the next, 20 to 50 years, we will see gender equality. Some of you are not so optimistic. So maybe from, this one on, we're a little more pessimistic and think, no, it's not going to happen anytime soon. So I'll give you just a few minutes to fill that in and get your guesses on that. Okay. So, unfortunately, the majority of you are actually wrong. So on our current trajectory, which means what we're doing right now, if we just kept doing exactly what we're doing right now, it's looking more like about 300 years. Depending on which report, but if you look at the UN Women recent report, they found that it will probably be about 286 years. Oops, I moved forward too quickly. 286 years until, I think, there we go. 200, I think I couldn't put exactly 86, but 285, 286 years. So pretty long time. It looks like 2 of you were in that general area, but most of you, all but 1 of you, were much more optimistic and thought we were doing much better than we actually are doing. Now, I'm going to ask you one more question. So what percentage of the CEOs of listed companies on maybe the Rwanda Stock Exchange, or maybe you're somewhere else, so in whatever country you're in, do you think are women? What percentage of CEOs, the head leader of companies listed in your country, do you think are women? Looks like we're starting out here fairly low. Someone there maybe said 0 or 1%. Here it looks like we're around 50% or more than 50%. Some of you think maybe 80% of the CEOs on your exchange are women. 2 of you, 3 of you now think 0 or 1%, not too many. We'll give you another couple minutes to fill that in. Okay, so it looks like it's a pretty fair spread, but the majority of you are thinking not too many. A couple of you do think maybe 20, 30%, maybe 50%, which is great. I don't think we have another. Oh yeah, one more question. So what percent of board seats do you think are held by women of listed companies in your country? So for most of you, that's Rwanda, but I saw some of you are in other countries as well. So whichever country. So a little more optimistic so far. So it looks like even though not so many CEOs we're expecting to be female, maybe some more board members are women. Some of you think more than half of the board seats of listed companies in your country are women holding those seats. A few of you are not so optimistic and think not many, maybe zero. Still all men taking those positions. All right. So Landon, maybe you can get those slides going again. I'll stop sharing here. That looks like a pretty good guess. Keep in mind what you guessed, what you thought. And now let's go look at what's happening in reality. All right. I see those slides are coming back up again. Great. So let's dive into the data. So we at the UNSSE, working together with UN Women and the IFC, have been tracking this for a little while. And we've been looking at the boardroom and the leadership of listed companies and seeing how they're doing in terms of gender equality. And we put out every year these market monitors. You may or may not be familiar with them, but they're an interesting resource you can use for data to see how your country is doing in corporate leadership in particular. Now, today we're going to talk about much more than leadership. It's not just about the CEO or the board member, of course, but this is a gauge of whether or not any women are even making it to the boardroom. And hopefully you understand from Landon's first unit why that's so important. But let's open up one of these publications here and zoom into that data. This publication in particular looks at, it has two analyses. This is last year's analysis. We have our new ones being finalized right now. So in the coming months, you'll hopefully see new data come out. But this one's looking at the G20. We also, in the same publication, take a regional perspective. Let's look at a bit of that data here, and then we're going to dive into Africa and see how correct all of you were, particularly for Rwanda. But this first table that you can see here, which is the G20, it shows that the average percent of boardroom seats held by women in the G20 is about 22%, which actually isn't too bad. We are aiming for 30%, and we'll talk about that a few times today about why 30% is so important and overcoming 30%. But we can see here that the top 5 exchanges in the G20 are then located in France, the UK, Italy, Australia, and the USA. Just to note that this is by exchange, not by country. So for example, the USA has 2 stock exchanges, and they vary how they do based on this data. So because we're looking at stock exchanges and they're listed companies, it can vary from one stock exchange to the next, even in the same country. I think it's also worth noting, since France is leading on the G20, and actually France has been leading these leaderboards for gender equality and corporate leadership for some time now, that they also have a regulatory requirement for women on boards, and they require 40% of boards to be women. However, if you look over on the chart, I know the titles are a bit hard to see there, but we also track how many CEOs are women. And France actually wasn't doing that great on the CEO position. And they did notice that their female executive leadership pipeline is not as strong as their board leadership pipeline. So in May 2021, the French Parliament actually voted to introduce gender quotas for executive leadership as well. So now not only in the boardroom, but also in their executive leadership, their C-suite, there must be 30% minimum by 2027. And by 2030, they also want 40% minimum of their corporate leadership in the C-suite in companies. Now, let's look a bit beyond the G20. Here's a regional overview. And so when we take a regional approach to the data on gender equality in corporate leadership, a few more things emerge. So only 2 regions have an average over 30%, Europe and the US, Canada, New Zealand grouping. Now, these are United Nations regions or groupings, so they might not be the ones that everyone uses, but just to note that that's how we're grouping them here. I think this is significant, again, because we're trying to reach that 30% representation. We'll, again, talk about that a little bit more today and on Wednesday. But 30% representation is what's been found to be able to create kind of fair power distribution and make sure that the less represented group is actually heard in the board. So if we only have 25% board members that are women or any other underrepresented group, then the likelihood is that group is not being heard. So they're not actually contributing to the diversity of that particular board. So what we're aiming for here is above 30%. And only 2 regions, those first 2, have actually surpassed the 30% mark. However, look at Africa right behind them at 22%. So we had some pessimism in our guesses. We had a lot of optimism as well. And actually, on the whole, I know Rwanda is not in this particular regional overview that we looked at, but on the whole, Africa as a continent is actually doing fairly well. Now, we'll dive a little bit more into that data and see that it really depends on the country and, of course, the companies. But it's good to see that we're seeing already some great leadership there. And the percentage of change has stayed equal. So it means it's not actually been improving in the last year to this year. We'll see what happens next year. Now I'm gonna dive into a regional report that we did particularly on Africa. If I can get this globe to spin a bit more and change the next slide. Sorry about our slow slides today, everyone. Landon, maybe you can, oh, it's happening. Are we stuck? Well, I'm going to leave it there. Landon, can you just maybe make sure the slide lands on the status of Africa? Thanks. Great. Okay, cool. So this is from one of our gender equality I'm going to go one more, sorry. This one is from the regional report, but I want to go into the deep dive of Africa. So this is from our deep dive report. We did a regional report specifically on Africa, and this one has Rwanda in it. And very pleased to show that Rwanda is actually in second place of all the exchanges we looked at in Africa. And as you can see here, in terms of the percentage of board seats held by women of the listed companies. Now, just to note that there are only 10 listed companies in this report, just because we selected all the listed companies for the Rwanda exchange. So it's a much smaller sample size than some of the other areas. However, 26% of those board seats of those listed companies were held by women. So we're 4% off the 30% mark, nearly there. But as you can see, there are some other countries, and some of you may be in these countries as well, that aren't doing quite as well. And if I'll skip to the bottom half of this. Let's see if it'll let me. There we go. The bottom half here, you can see that at the very bottom, Egypt has only 12%. And so we can see that it varies, from more than 30% to just 12%. So we have a little ways to go. Trying to go the other way here. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. Well, while that slide comes back, oh, there we go. Just to note, we also asked you about the percentage of CEO positions. And, quite a few of you were on the pessimistic side, saying maybe 1%, 0%, 5%, which is actually quite typical. We still have a long ways to go in terms of CEO or C-suite more broadly being held by women. But in Rwanda, especially of those 10 listed companies, actually, it's one of the highest we've seen. So 20%, which is maybe the highest. I think we'd have to look, but I think it might be the highest that we've seen. So really, that's really fantastic there. So we wanted to ask you then, what do you think is preventing, that last mile, moving just that little bit more in Rwanda? What are the barriers to progress to make sure that we keep moving and getting to where we want to be? And then what do you think are the barriers in other countries who aren't doing so well? How come they're not able to get as many women in those board seats or in the C-suite in those leadership positions? So type in the chat if you're willing to share your comments there, or if you want to share it anonymously, you can do that in the Q&A. So if you open up the Q&A, you can enter a question anonymously and share your thoughts about that. And I'll give you just a moment to think about that. What are the barriers preventing progress? I see that Alice has raised her hand. Alice, we can't unmute you, unfortunately, but if you want to share your thoughts in the chat box, we'd love to have your ideas. So Bob gives our first barrier, and he says cultural. Certainly. Do you want to maybe explore that a little bit more? What do you think is the particular aspect of a cultural mindset that might prevent moving forward? A conservative mindset? Yeah, we're seeing that actually sometimes enhance in some areas. A matter of time and understanding, but mostly cultural. Yep. Certainly. So a lot of you think that cultural aspect plays an aspect. Emmanuel says self-confidence, which also plays a really important role here. Of course, it in some ways can be the self-confidence of the leadership already, but also the confidence of the women themselves to move up that ladder and to even apply for some of these positions that they might not think they have the capabilities for. And to some extent, that links with what Calixte said in terms of low education level. And that can be on all sides as well, too. We might see that women aren't getting education in certain industries that tend to be male-oriented. They might not be prioritizing kind of, for example, the STEM industries. So they're not encouraged to move into these areas and educate themselves or to do particular types of education. It can also be the flip side, right? It could be the existing leadership, the hiring processes and the education that we've had that helps us to remove biases from how we do that. I also see here how we parent. Yeah, it can start from the very early ages of what our parents talk about, how they talk about other people, how they talk about the different genders, and how they teach us to accept others and diversity and value diverse opinions and have open conversations with people who might think differently than us and see the value of having those conversations. So really good job, everyone. I think you all have really great ideas on that. I'm going to go through a few of the main barriers because I think these barriers are really important, because if we don't look at what the barriers are to move forward, we're not actually going to be able to move forward because we might be fixing something that's not actually the problem. So one of the barriers we see are actually related to data. There's a limited availability of sex disaggregated data. So separating out male and female in our hiring processes, for example. We'll talk a lot about that moving forward, and inconsistent reporting practices, which makes it really difficult to measure progress within an organization and to understand the extent of the gender gap that might already exist. And in turn, this creates challenges in identifying effective interventions to close the gaps. Also, someone said education. We are definitely seeing a lack of training and professional development opportunities, particularly in areas with frontline operational or financial responsibilities, which hinder women's attainment of those qualifications. We're also seeing a lack of gender-sensitive human capital management. So as I said, it's not just training the women, it's also training the men that are hiring the women, perhaps. or the women that are hiring the women. So this includes hiring, it includes retention, it includes promotion processes such as non-diverse hiring committees and limited use of gender-blind applications, for example. And this lack of gender-sensitive human capital management can lead to decisions based on biases rather than on qualifications. And a failure to recruit widely for applications or not embedding a gender lens into job postings can also reduce the number of qualified women applicants. Now, some other things we're seeing a lot here is biases and stereotypes and culture. So culture has been mentioned a lot of times. And these biases and stereotypes suggest that women do not have the characteristics needed to lead, such as logistical thinking and decisiveness, or it creates a double blind in which women are expected to be, nice and competent, but cannot be both nice and competent. So these biases are more subtle than the norms that deliberately exclude women and can be actually more challenging to overcome because we often don't realize we even have them. The next one there is lack of awareness or skepticism, and this pertaining to the business case for gender balance leadership. And this can mean that initiatives to advance women may not be a topic or a top strategic priority for companies. So, as allies, men in leadership who have embraced the values of diversity and inclusion can help to elevate the importance of such initiatives and drive action. And as you can see here, we also have a number of other barriers, such as a limited access to networks and connections, a lack of access to role models and mentors or coaches and sponsors, and also then the work environment itself, like unsuitable work environments in traditionally male-dominated industries, and also safety concerns in operational locations and gender-based violence. So it's important to note that achieving a truly gender diverse senior leadership team and optimizing the true value in diversity is more than sheer numbers and gaining parity and representation. The key is ensuring that men and women have equal voice and agency once they're in those leadership roles, so that they can contribute to determining their organization's path. Now, before we wrap up this section, I just want to highlight a publication that recently came out from the IFC. This one is particularly on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders. So if you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend taking a look at this publication. We'll share a link in the chat momentarily here. And you can then learn a little bit more about these barriers, particularly as they come to gender and climate, which we'll talk about a little bit more tomorrow. But you can see very similar barriers here, a lack of knowledge and training, silos between the two topics, funding and budget constraints, etc. So all more barriers that we need to keep in mind and look for in order to overcome them. So with that, I think that brings us to our next unit, and Landon's going to take us through that. So over to you, Landon.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany. So before we go to a short break, let's go dive into a bit more about the complexity of this topic and focus in on some key terms used when discussing gender equality. So we're going to come to another mentee about what you think of when you think of gender equality. So to be clear, there's no right or wrong answer. And if you can only think of one or two words, that's no problem. So using the next mentee, which is up now, let us know what gender means to you by sharing a few words that describe the meaning of gender to you. And we'll be a bit quick on this one. So again, try to just what comes to your mind. Again, no right or wrong. Okay, a couple of responses coming in. Okay, different sex. Yeah, we'll touch on those pieces. Okay. Equality on men and women. Equity. Okay. We're going to dive into equity a little bit in a minute. Identity. Yep, that's a good one. Okay. A few more seconds because we do want to give you a few minutes to stretch your legs. Okay, great. Okay, so you all had some great answers, so we'll end the Menti there. Yeah, fantastic. More people coming in with answers. But to make sure we get on the same page and understand the depth of gender, which is not simply sex being male or female, um, we'll sorry, the purpose of the initial exercise is just to make sure that everyone understands that gender is not the same as sex and that gender can differ in different contexts and societies. Um, so this is important because it's not really different sexes we always need when we talk about the value of diversity. It's actually different ways of thinking, different life experiences or lived experiences, and different institutional restrictions or freedoms. So while the term gender is actually quite difficult to define because it means something different to different people, let's briefly get a better idea of what is included in this complex term. Okay, so we'll come back to the slides here and before we dive back in there. Great. So there we go. So now UN Women defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female in the relationships between women and men and girls and boys, as well as the relations between women and those between men. These attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed and are learned through socialization processes. They're context and time specific and also changeable. Gender determines what is expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or a man in a given context. And in most societies, there's differences and inequalities between women and men in responsibilities assigned, activities undertaken, access to and control over different resources, as well as decision-making opportunities. Gender is part of the broader socio-cultural context. Other important criteria for socio-cultural analysis includes class, race, poverty level, ethnic group, and age. And as such, gender is not quite as simple as male or female. Gender can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, on history, on context, and on institutions or norms. And perhaps most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember that we're referring to equality of the genders, not simply increasing women on boards. So feel free to explore this and gender equality terms on the gender equality glossary developed by UN Women that we link in the slides. Now we're going to move on to next piece, which is a term many of you are probably familiar with, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of this acronym, but we're increasingly seeing DEI managers or even teams and organizations that focus on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So why not just diversity teams or just equity teams? Well, let's dig a bit deeper into how these concepts connect and interact with one another, and the importance of having all three of these as a part of this equation. Let's start first with equity on the bottom left there, which ensures that there's equitable power distribution among people. You can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same extent so that everyone can hear them both equally, which many might be thinking, well, that's the objective, isn't it? Not quite, it's just part of the picture. Let's say, for example, that our objective is equity, equal power distribution, but there are no women in the organization to fairly distribute power to, so there's no one to pick up the microphone. That means we also need to focus on the next element of diversity. So diversity is ensuring representation. The act of inviting the unrepresented gender to join the board enhances the diversity of the board. So think of diversity as having enough seats at the table for diversity to be represented at the table. Again, differences and different lived experiences are important to organizations. So it's not enough to just have the microphones at the table to make sure everyone can speak at the same volume, but also enough chairs at the table so that a diverse group of participants are there and willing to speak. Now, if we just have these two, we can have cultural assimilation take place where we expect, for example, women to act just like the men, and then we will struggle to keep them on the board, for example, and we won't be benefiting from the diversity we aimed to achieve. So it's no good just to give someone a microphone if they're not willing to speak, or alternatively, to claim by giving someone the power to speak based on their appearances alone is achieving diversity when the objective of diversity is to include diverse ways of thinking and diverse lived experiences. So this is why we also have inclusion. Inclusion refers to behaviors and the practice of making all members of an organization feel welcomed, giving them equal opportunity to connect, belong, grow, and contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident in being their authentic selves. So to bring it all together, we can say that diversity is being invited to the boardroom, equity is then having the empowerment to speak at the board meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that board meeting. But of course, this goes much further than the boardroom and should be considered organization-wide. The end goal then is equality, which depends on all three circles, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can have diversity without equity or inclusion, and it will not be sustained. Equally, we can have equity without diversity, and again, it won't be sustained or we won't make progress. So when we talk about equality today and in the next section, especially when we talk about the benefits it brings, remember that we're not simply looking for an equal number of men and women on boards or in organizations. What we really want is these three things: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So now you can find in your handout a more detailed version of this diagram, but hopefully this is a good opportunity to grab a cup of tea, stretch. So we'll give you a few minutes. We'll try to get some music, quiet, nice music playing. And then when the music ends, please come back and we'll continue on. So again, we'll just give you 5 minutes now. Thanks so much.
The music does not seem to work, but please come back in 5 minutes. Landon, at the end, maybe just reshare the slides because we'll need the sound for the video. Okay, I hope everyone had a chance to maybe do a quick stretch, grab themselves a coffee or a tea. We're already halfway through the training session, so just less than an hour to go. Hopefully already you've learned a thing or two, but let's dive even deeper now with the next unit or the next module of our training. Oh, the sound works now, which is fantastic. Great. So the next module is that align module. And if you remember at the start, and I know some of you joined a bit late, so maybe you weren't here for this part. But the align module, our second module, is really identifying what practices you can use or standards or frameworks in order to align your trajectory in a positive, forward moving direction. And we look at global, local, and peers in order to attain certain practices you can use to make sure you're aligning in the right direction. So to get us started, we're going to look at global principles that companies can use to enhance their practices on this topic. And the global standards that we're going to discuss today are indeed the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. Now, before we pass on to UN Women, we have Maya here with us from UN Women. Let's do a quick poll and just get a sense of maybe where you all are at. So we want to know if your organization is a signatory of the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. So you can select yes, you can select no, or you can say I don't know, because it's perfectly okay to not know if your organization is already a signatory. Hopefully after this session, those of you who don't know will look into it and see if you are or aren't. And if you're not, maybe start moving the wheels to take the steps to move forward. So we have just a few of you have filled that in so far. So I'm going to let the rest of you fill it in. I'll pause a minute. Maybe people are just coming back from their break. If you are having trouble, though, accessing that poll through Zoom, just let us know in the chat and we'll figure that out with you. It looks like the winning number so far, though, is I don't know. So a lot of you are maybe a bit unfamiliar about what the WEPs are, how you can use them. So that's good, because Maya, you have your work cut out for you now. You have a purpose to show everyone what these women's empowerment principles are. But there are a few that have said yes. So far we have 13% of the participants have said yes. We have over half of you participating now, so I think I'm going to end the poll and share the results just so everybody can see. So as I said, well, it was 13, now it's 12%. So 4 of you that filled in the poll said that your organizations are already signatories of the UN WEPs. 6 of you know that your organizations are not, and 23 are unsure. So have some research to do after this session. That's wonderful. So before Maya kicks us off, we're going to just share a quick video to introduce the WEPs. Maybe Landon, you want to hit play on that video for us?
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact. The Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. commit to the women's empowerment principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Great. That's some good inspirational music to get us kicked off after the break too. Maya, over to you to take us a bit further through the.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tiffany, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Maya Löfström. I'm the WEPS Program Analyst at UN Women, and I'm super excited to be part of this training session to introduce you to the Women Empowerment Principles, also called the WEPS. So I see both WEPS signatories, non-signatories here, and some who are not sure. So I hope this session will be a helpful refresher or a learning opportunity for all of you. So maybe we can see the right slide. Let me see. Anyway, but with the rising importance of reporting and ESG, environmental, societal, and governance, more companies are realizing the need to focus on gender equality. However, many are unsure of how to take those steps and how to go forward with action, and that's where the WEPs come in. So the WEPs serve as a practical guide to integrating gender equality into business strategy and operations, impacting the workplace, marketplace, and community. So WEPs provide this holistic framework that helps companies advance on gender equality while driving positive outcomes for both business and society. And they also provide this roadmap for achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 5, SDGs, on gender equality. So if you can take it back to the slide before on the map, you can see the global reach of the WEPs. So we have over 10,000 companies in 190 plus countries who have committed to these principles. This is demonstrating the widespread impact of the WEPs initiative. So now we can go to the next slide. There we have the 7 WEPs principles. So I'll walk you through them briefly. Principle 1 focuses on CEO and leadership commitment. So it's not just about promoting women in leadership roles, but it's also about ensuring top executives are committed to making gender equality a core strategy within their business. And then we have principles 2, 3, and 4, which focuses on the workplace, on treating all employees fairly without discrimination. This is not only about women, it's also about men. It's about gender equality in general. It's about ensuring health, safety, and well-being at work, providing education and training for career growth. So it's important to think innovatively here and to think based on your company, on your surroundings, on your community, your workplace, what could work for you. So an example of that under principle number 2 was a bank from Spain who noticed that men were advancing more quickly because they worked very late, while women had to leave early for family responsibilities. So to level the playing field, they then decided that they're going to introduce a new policy to close their offices at 7 p.m. So this really helped create equal opportunities for career progression. Then we go on to principle number 5, which deals with the marketplace, encouraging companies to promote a more diverse supply chain and gender-responsive marketing. So at UN Women, we work with companies to adopt gender-responsive procurement as a part of a sustainable supply chain. And then principle number 6 is about our community engagement. And here we're really urging companies to consult and engage with local women and girls and ensure that the initiatives truly benefit them. So it's about connecting with the community in which you are working in. And finally, we have principle 7, which focuses on measuring and publicly reporting progress. So companies are encouraged from our side to collect data and to track their gender equality efforts. They don't have to publish it like publicly on our website, but we do really encourage it for transparency. So now we can go on to the next slide. And here we can see that becoming a WEP signatory, it means embarking on a journey towards gender equality. And after signing up, companies are expected to engage internal stakeholders, show public commitment across their value chains, and also report on the progress. So it's not about quick wins here. It's about addressing the systemic inequalities for a more lasting change. And this slide shows the steps which companies take after joining, from activating internal stakeholders to sustaining progress through regular data and collection and reporting. So it might sound like a little bit of a difficult process, but don't worry, at UN Women, we offer a lot of tools and resources for companies on how to work on the webs. We can go to the next slide. So you might be wondering, how can you become a part of the webs network? So your company needs to be legally registered. We accept companies from all sectors, sizes, and ownership types. And even stock exchanges are eligible. We have 35 at the moment who have already signed up to our webs principles. And continuing with the application process, you can simply go to the webs.org website to fill out the online form to apply to join to become a signatory. And speaking of these stock exchanges, the webs is a part of Ring the Bell for Gender Equality. Organizers along with SSE, IFC, and the World Federation of Exchanges and the UN Global Compact. And Ring the Bell is an event where stock exchanges ring the bell to raise awareness about gender equality around International Women's Day in March. So stay tuned for that. And for more info about the webs, you can go to visit our website, webs.org. And I think that's all from my side. So thank you so much for listening.
Great. Thanks so much, Maya. And hopefully everybody now is eager to find out if their own company is a signatory. But if you do have questions, Maya won't be with Maya, or you're not coming with us on Wednesday, right? We're going to have your colleague with us on Wednesday.
Exactly. But she can answer all your questions as well.
So still come with your questions, because we will have UN Women with us next time at Wednesday. So if you'd like to learn more about any part of the webs, please do look into that. And we will dive a little bit deeper into it on Wednesday as well. Now, just to note before we wrap up the kind of this global aspect of the alignment unit, I just wanted to mention the EDGE certificate as well. So those of you, the few of you, I think there were 4 that said your organization's already a signatory of the WEPs. You might be looking at how you can take it one step further. And this is one of the options that we recommend. EDGE, the EDGE certification is a global standard for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's centered on workplace, gender, and intersectional equity approach. So this is, I wouldn't say a first step. This is more an advancement that you can take once your organization has already started on its gender equality journey, and you want to not only become a signatory of the WEPs and use all their great guidelines and tools to move forward, but also really show that stamp of approval to the market. And next time we're talking a lot about kind of the market reaction and how to get investment for these things. So EDGE certification can be a useful tool. Now with that, I am going to pass back to Landon, who's going to take us through our next unit on local. Over to you, Landon.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. So now that we've had a look at some global initiatives, let's have a look at what we should be considered based on your location. So one of the key factors that should be considered based on where your company is listed, as well as where your main operations are, is regulation. So let's discuss what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective. First, let's look at some women on board stats. So on this slide, we can see a number of markets where there's some kind of gender quota or requirement set for listed companies from a past report we produced. On the right, you can see the current status of gender diversity on the boards of companies in these markets, as well as the percentage of female board chairs and CEOs. Now, one question we often get asked is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work and if this should be implemented in a country. So this is a hotly debated topic, and if you'd like to dig into a bit deeper into this topic, you can review the extra slides we've included in your handout today, which includes and provides some insight from a recent study featured by the UN PRI about gender-based quota policies. But as we've seen in the data we discussed today, sometimes this works and sometimes this doesn't work. Why is that? Well, it's not entirely, the reason. A portion of that is because it really depends on how the company implements these quotas, what actions are taken by the company, and how such a rule or regulation might be interpreted. So let's come down to the company level to see what we mean by how a company implements it and do a little exercise together. So here we have an exercise where we're going to discuss 2 hypothetical companies. Let's call one company Owl Incorporated on the bottom, and the other we'll call Peacock PLC. So these are entirely fictional, made-up companies, but the discussion we'll have on their decision-making processes is based on research on real companies. Now, as you see on the screen, both of these companies have only 10% women on their boards and in executive leadership, but both have parity or about 50-50 split for women and men in operational level positions. So it's clear women aren't getting into these higher level executive positions. They also have another thing in common. They both just had a change in leadership and they have a new CEO joining. And let's say that both CEOs are expecting new regulation to come in, so they're preparing for a mandatory rule related to gender equality. The new CEO at both companies is passionate about gender equality. They want to achieve gender equality at the top of the companies in their board and leadership positions so they can be included in a gender equality index, which will give them more exposure to investors that value gender parity. Each company, however, took a different approach towards their goals of gender equality and therefore had differing results. So let's now discuss the two approaches and what they do. First, we'll look at Peacock PLC. So as mentioned, they bring in a new CEO and they set a target of 40% women in leadership positions in 2 years. To do this, they make an announcement. The CEO is a woman herself, so she also shares her experiences. And to help reach this 40%, they set a hiring freeze of any men until the target is reached, unless approved by the CEO for extenuating circumstances. Now, that leaves some employees feeling excited and empowered, but there's some, some women are a bit scared of more pressure to move up or out, and some men may have some job security concerns hearing about the hiring freeze. So overall, you can say the sentiment is in this org is some excitement, but mixed with some adequate fear. Now let's look on the other side at what Owl does. So it's also a new CEO, as I said, a new woman CEO committed to gender equality in leadership positions. But instead of the 40% target alongside a hiring freeze, the CEO decides to join the 30% club, which, if you're not familiar, the 30% club calls on its members to commit to at least 30% female representation on their boards and executive leadership teams, because this is the critical mass at which minority voices become heard. So they want to surpass 30% versus the 40%, which is a bit more of a ceiling or top target for Peacock PLC. Now, while they want to achieve and surpass the 30%, the CEO is not totally sure of the root cause, so they set up an internal task force to find out what these root causes may be in their organization. And at the same time, the CEO also initiates a mentorship program. Considering this, if 50% of the women, or excuse me, of the workforce are women already, there's a bit of a question why leadership aren't learning from them and hearing their experiences, which can benefit leadership. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, and an open question to you folks. We'll go back to the Mentimeter of what strategies do you think will work best, and I'll turn it back over to Tiffany for this part.
Great. Thanks, Landon. We'll give everyone a second to just give their thoughts and rank these activities. So these are 6 activities that Landon just discussed. 3 of them were done by Owl Inc., 3 of them by Peacock PLC. Give your sense of which you think are the most effective and which are the least effective. So the options there are setting a target of 40% women in leadership, sharing examples of role models at the top, initiating a hiring freeze of the overrepresented gender, joining the 30% club, creating a gender equality task force, and initiating a reverse mentorship program. And just a reminder about that 30% club, that joining the 30% club sets a minimum of 30%. So, ideally we want to go a bit beyond that, but the idea is, as we talked about earlier today, that you need to have more than 30% representation of that minority in order for them to be heard. So joining the 30% club could mean achieving 50-50 parity. Okay, so we're getting a few answers coming in here. Just a few of you have answered. Those of you struggling to get into the Menti again, remember you can go back to the same browser you were in before, just refresh it, or it might have been refreshed already for you. For those who maybe closed out that browser they were in already, you can use that QR code on the bottom left side, or you can just go to www.menti.com and use that code on the top of your screen, or you can use the link that Landon can share in the chat for you. Now, it looks like winning out in number 1 right now is creating a gender equality task force, which is my personal favorite of all of these. So I certainly agree with that one. I'll let you all take a second to still fill that in. Okay. Okay, so let's compare a couple of these. You can still give your comments as we're discussing them. But we saw kind of a few different things that were similar. I think the most easy ones to compare here are the 40% versus 30%. And now we often see 40% higher up in this ranking than 30%. But I think this is where we need to be careful with, how we're setting our wording of these targets and what we're working towards. Because actually, joining the 30% club sets 30%, as I said, as a minimum. So that's the minimum you want to achieve. Whereas setting a target of 40% is, where you're trying to achieve the top end of it. We just have to make it to 40%, nothing past that. So actually, I would say that joining the 30% club would be more effective than setting a target of 40%, because by joining the 30% club, which seems to be dropping, so a lot of you disagree with me, so feel free to share why. But by saying, okay, we're joining the 30% club, we're going to say we're hitting the minimum of 30% in leadership in an organization of women. The end objective might be 50% of parity. 50-50 would be great, but a minimum 30%. Whereas setting a target of 40% means that you're aiming for 40% and nothing more than that. So those two can sound like, you want to go for the higher number, but really, what is your objective? What is the end goal? What are you working towards? We also see initiating a reverse mentorship program, as well as sharing examples of role models at the top. Now, these are similar. They're both about mentorship and role models and those connections. However, one of them is one-way communication and the other one is two-way communication. And now let's remember when we were talking about kind of education and barriers, that often it's not just, the women that need to improve their education or move forward. It's also the men, or vice versa, depending on, who's the minority in the particular organization. Sometimes the leadership needs to learn from those minorities as well. So I would say that sharing examples of role models at the top certainly can be helpful, so that those lower down can understand how those role models made it. But reverse mentorship program might be more effective because you're both learning. You're learning from each other. So that's another option there. Then we see setting a target of 40%. Oh, sorry, we're creating a task force. That's the one I wanted to talk about next. At the very top, you said creating a task force. And at the very bottom, initiating a hiring freeze of the overrepresented gender. Now, these are also kind of contrary actions. So creating a gender equality task force is saying, we don't know what the problem is here. We're going to figure out what it is. What is that barrier holding us back? And then we're going to act on it. Whereas initiating a hiring freeze says, we're just going to act. We know that there's not many women at the top. We don't know why, but we're just going to act, and we're going to stop all men from getting hired. And I think you're totally right in that assessment, in that the The hiring freeze might take a quick action. It might move right away, but it might be the wrong action because you haven't done that investigation yet to determine what is going to move you forward and what is the barrier and why aren't there any women at the top. So I think that's how I would do it too. Is the most effective one would be a gender equality task force. Let's figure out what's going on. And the least effective would probably be a hiring freeze. Maybe at some point you decide that that is something that's useful. But I think in few cases, that's going to be the most useful action that you can take. I think that's all of them. So Landon, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and I'm going to pass back to you to take us through the rest of the activity.
Great, thanks so much, Tiffany. 1 second as I share the slides back, and then we're going to look at what some of the outcomes of prioritizing the targets were. Great. Um, let's see. Oh, there we go. So we'll start off with the Peacock PLC and look at some of the impacts that may result from taking an approach like them and prioritizing these targets. So they may have seen some immediate progress after setting this quota, but since they didn't identify the underlying issues that were the root cause, they didn't have too much success in promoting women. Well, they also may have demotivated the men in the organization as men feel like they have less security and opportunity to grow. Uh, they could have needed more time to recruit new staff, and sometimes it might not have been the right candidate, and also using external hiring to fill positions, which can demotivate existing staff. And you can also see a decrease or a stagnation in innovation from this approach. So overall, the result was a culture change in the organization with higher turnover, less innovation, and risks taken. But this may not be the most strategic of approaches to have taken. Well, we look at next OWL. Um, so the new CEO had similar ambitions and intentions as Peacock PLC CEO, but they obviously went about it differently, as we discussed. So it's important to note that likely they had to invest more upfront, but very soon they will see a return on that investment. Whereas we can see that Peacock PLC may not have had to pay much upfront, but they'll pay for it in the longer run. Of that investment. So Owl Inc. took a much more holistic approach and realized that if they wanted to benefit from the changes in that organization's leadership when they managed to achieve gender equality, this would not only have to be accepted by the whole organization, but they'd also need to tackle specific issues within the organization that cause the lack of diversity to begin with. And for that, we go back to what Tiffany was discussing, which was creating the task force, as well as implementing a reverse mentorship program. And by doing so, Owl Inc. was able to identify not only the specific barriers that can come from inflexible working arrangements, biased benefits, or a lack of support for certain genders to be able to succeed, but they were also able to change the leadership culture through the mentorship program, which opened their eyes to the value of diversity in decision-making processes. And as a result, the company actually saw increased innovation since, as discussed before, diversity leads to more pushback of ideas, but it also pushed leaders to think of new and innovative solutions. Since they ended up saving resources associated with external hires, they could also continue to train and educate staff members, existing staff members, to further enhance the culture within the organization that they were looking for. So as we start to discuss a corporate culture, we want to say that regulation does not depend on not only the quota, if you choose to set it, but also this corporate culture and potentially deeper issues that may be issues in an organization. On that note, regarding corporate culture, which we don't really have enough time for to get through today in detail, but I do recommend you review this before our next session in a couple days. And it's a useful slide that gives you a list of some actions you can take to make sure you're identifying the root cause and not making the same mistakes as Peacock PLC did. So to wrap this section up, let's take a quick poll. So how can your company improve its financial performance? And you can choose more than one answer. So we'll give you a couple minutes or a minute or so to think about this and input the answer. And I may have missed this, but in brackets, it does note more than one answer may be correct. So please keep that in mind as well. Okay, just a few more seconds and then we'll look at the results and carry on. Okay, there we go. So we had a lot of folks answer with the first, implementing policies that promote gender diversity. We also had 71% also select setting gender-based targets. And then in a distance third, we had collecting gender disaggregated data. And then at 11% was creating all women boards. And at only 7% was only promoting women until you reach parity. So the answer was 1, 3, and 5. And we really want to emphasize the importance of all three, not just one. For example, with just gender-based targets, but no policies to ensure women are supported to stay in leadership roles, and data is not collected with collecting gender disaggregated data, you might not understand the root cause or why less women are applying for promotions or leadership roles. Then you'll likely be missing the root of the problem and will constantly struggle to reach equality. And without equity, there won't be sustainable equality. So moving on, after looking at the global and local levels, let's focus together on the level of companies and look at peer group practices to stay ahead. To kick us off here, I'll pass it to Maya to add some color to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Landon. So I'll give you some examples of implementing the WEPs by our WEP signatories. So some signatories have decided to work on the workplace issues. We have, for example, a management company in South Africa who implemented a strategy to increase women's representation to 40% across all senior levels of the organization. So this is a little bit what Tiffany and Landon was talking about before. And to achieve this, they launched a women's leadership development program to enhance the recruitment of women. With this clear goal and an action plan in place, the company exceeded its targets, reaching 41% of women in senior level positions. Another example is from my country in Sweden, who tackled the gender pay gap for 16,000 employees in 4 countries. This was from a bank, and it operates in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden. So they put in place this job evaluation system and they kept it updated regularly. And this was critical for them to understand what roles are comparable to others and how equal pay could be measured. So they followed up on this with close monitoring and reporting of the program and reported on the results on a regular basis. Others have gone more into the marketplace issues. For example, a financial platform in the US aimed to increase lending to women entrepreneurs, particularly those from small businesses, to enhance their economic resilience and their independence. And to achieve this, they established a dedicated fund focused on improving access to capital for women-owned businesses and reducing their cost of borrowing. So as a result, they committed to ensuring approximately 40% of their annual capital allocation, which would be directed towards women-owned businesses. And another one is a bank in Palestine. They had been supporting women-owned businesses to improve financial inclusion for women in the country. They provided comprehensive financial awareness and banking literacy training to women-owned businesses. and they run a mini MBA program for women entrepreneurs to develop their business development skills and to access financial products to support them in growing their business. So lastly, companies participated in WEP's Business Accelerator to support their WEP's journey with the UN Women support. And I think I take the next slide now. Yes, so we have some great tools for you to access, like the Gender Action Plan module, Gender Responsive Recruitment Checklist, and Gender Responsive Procurement Tool, and many others. So whilst this might sound a little bit difficult to get started with, it's actually not at all difficult, and we offer the guidance and the steps for you to follow. We have over 300 tools and resources to guide you how to work on the WEPs. So, sorry, my voice. So becoming a WEP signatory is about much more than just signing up. It's about making a real lasting commitment to gender equality in your business practices and contributing to more inclusive economies. Whether through leadership development, equal pay, or supporting women entrepreneurs, the WEPs provide this clear path for driving progress and creating meaningful change. So we invite you to join our global initiative towards gender equality. And I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to the impact your companies will make in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. And another really great set of tools. So we did see in the chat, some people are sharing some tools too. So add this to your toolbox as you get started. And we appreciate that, Maya. Thanks for joining us today. Now, normally we talk about gender equality indices here with Harry, but I just found out Harry's sick and he wasn't able to log us in. Fortunately, I've listened to his presentation enough times that I could do it for him. So I'm going to be Harry today. Just pretend I have a mustache and a beard and I've slimmed down a little bit and now I'm Harry. Thanks everyone though for your patience with all the technical issues that we've had today. Now, we're actually a little short on time, so I'm going to whiz through Harry's presentation here. Just give me a second here to change my screen. Great. So this is actually about the gender equality indices. And what Harry normally takes you through is a bit of an introduction to the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. That's something that I probably won't be able to give a ton of insight to, but I'll give it my best shot. And really what they ask of companies. The Gender Equality Index is going through an evolution now and recently just changed. So we'll give you a bit of insight into that as well. Then we're going to look at a few of the gender equality scores, and we're going to do a little exercise quickly together to help us understand why this data is so important. So to get started on the background, Bloomberg really looked at having a standardized reporting method used globally to acquire comprehensive workplace gender data, and they started this with a survey. So they collected metrics that they found to be critical to promoting equity in the workplace in the current global environment surrounding gender equality. And they set definitions for each data point to ensure the data is consistently measured across markets and industries. They also then added on publicly listed data to promote transparency. And this is how the Gender Equality Index was really born. However, things are changing, as we mentioned. So the future of the Gender Equality Index is actually expanding. So, well, initially they were looking at mostly survey-based information. So they required companies to provide a lot of this information directly to them, and it wasn't always publicly disclosed. They're now looking at moving towards publicly disclosed data. I think this is really interesting because it means that we've moved into a world where there is more publicly available information and that companies have decided to share this information publicly, which often means that investors are asking for such information. So the Gender Equality Index team at Bloomberg has undergone a really long and very detailed open engagement process to decide on exactly what KPIs they were going to focus on in their new Gender Equality Index. This is because they had to narrow it down quite a bit. They had a lot of questions in the questionnaire, and companies spent a lot of time filling that in. But when they were moving to publicly disclosed data, they had to look at what are the exact data points that they wanted to look at. Now, they, I think, just finished this process, so soon we'll see the new Gender Equality Index, but we do have some data here based on their old database, which had a lot of information directly from companies. And we want to look at two companies here in this case study. So we have LVMH, which is a high-profile luxury fashion brand. You might know them as being the group owner of Louis Vuitton, for example. And then we also have a company called Under Armour, which is a popular sportswear brand. You might have seen their sportswear equipment. So high fashion on one side, sports equipment on the other side. So think a little bit about the company's kind of high level social factors at play and any biases you might have. So already think about it. Which of these two companies do you think would have a higher gender equality score? What's your first instinct? Do you think it's the luxury fashion brand, or do you think it's the sportswear brand? Now let's look at the scores. So we're not going to tell you which is which here. You'll have to guess at the end. But just to note that this is the Bloomberg terminal. Landon's becoming quite an expert on this Bloomberg terminal, but sometimes it can seem a little bit like there's a lot going on. But just to note that this is kind of where they've broken down the scores. They have social governance areas where they're looking at, and you can see diversities under there. I think I'll move to the next slide where we can see a little bit more here. And actually, they found gender equality to fit kind of throughout their ESG scores, especially the social side and the governance. So as you can see here, they have kind of different weightings and score levels. At the social level, we have social supply chain management, governance board composition and diversity. We also see supply chain management, and then we see different types of diversity in the board, and these are all different areas that they're assessing. Now, if we look at these two companies, one of them is on the left-hand side and one on the right. We're not going to share which is which just yet. You can see that some of this information actually just not disclosed by one of the company. They did not share the company on the left, particularly practices related to promoting gender equality within their organization. So they don't say if there's paid primary paternal leave offered by the company or secondary parental leave. They also don't disclose if there's any retention rate after parental leave. So do people come back after they've had children? And they don't disclose about any sort of family care benefits. And why is this important? It's actually important because how do we know that that's not one of the reasons that women aren't staying in our company and making it to the top, to those senior leadership levels? Maybe we have a high number of percentage of senior leadership, but a lot of them are actually just coming in later on. They're not staying in the company, which can actually be quite expensive for a company. We also see at the top, both companies struggled a little bit with some of the disclosures pertaining to the percentage of women in total promotions and the percentage of women attrition. So we're going to do a quick poll here and see what you think. I'm just going to see if I can get those. Maybe, Landon, can you help me to get this poll launched? Because it's not letting me open the polls now that I'm sharing the screen. And we want you to guess who's who. Who do you think is A and who do you think is B? And I see that A and B is not showing up here, but A is the first column. So the one that's not disclosing very much about how they're treating their women. And B is the one that does show a lot more. I see we've got the wrong poll here. I think I can launch it now that I see it. There we go. Okay, so which company do you think is company A, that left-hand column? Is it the high fashion one or is it the sports company? And Landon, I also cannot see the results for some reason now.
1 second, I was having the same issue today. Hold on.
Well, maybe everyone just share in the chat because we're nearly out of time now. A or B, let us know in the chat. Well, no one has a guess. It seems that you just can't decide. It's actually A, this column on the left-hand side is actually the high fashion company. And on the right-hand side, the one that actually has better disclosure is the sports company. So are you shocked? Do you think that's what it is? The end of the story was that you can't manage what you don't measure. I think we've all seen that before. I'm going to stop sharing the slides now and let Landon turn the slides back on so we can wrap up. But the point of that was to show that we need to see a lot more than just who's at the board to be able to assess a company. And our biases might get in the way if we don't have that extra data to realize that maybe, for example, the high fashion company might have had less trouble attracting women to apply into their organization. So it might be easier for them to have women at the top. But that doesn't mean that they're getting that diversity and inclusion that Landon was talking about earlier, because they don't have the right policies and practices in place to make people feel heard and comfortable moving up the ladder and contributing their diverse opinions and lived experiences. So with that, Landon, I'm going to pass to you to wrap up, and I will share the Menti so that everybody can share their thoughts on that. Just have to get that
Great.
Menti.
Thanks so much. So as we get to the end of this first session, we also want to make you think a bit about how you can put what you've learned so far today into practice. So with this in mind, we have a Menti question that asks, name one activity that you plan to initiate in your organization that could help improve gender equality. So we'll give you a minute here.
You must have one activity, everyone. If you can't access the Menti, just let us know. But we only have 2 minutes.
Don't hesitate to think back about the activity we did or that I went through about peacock and owl, and maybe there's some inspiration there. Okay, first, gender targets. Yep. We discussed a bit about how those can be implemented in the best possible way to not have some of the drawbacks of potential targets, but that's a good answer. Basic reporting, sure. That's definitely important. Reporting, collecting the data, sharing it amongst the company and external stakeholders. Oh, a lot of answers coming in now. Fantastic. Policies that promote gender diversity, ensure the policies are in place. Yep, that's a good step. Fantastic. So some good answers coming in there, but we want to move to the next Menti in the sake of time to see how you feel and if you feel more confident on this topic than before this session. So it again asks you, what's your level of comfort with this topic now? And we'll ask you to quickly answer this one to help get us a better idea of your comfort level after our first session. Okay, couple answers coming in. Some people very confident, which is great. Okay, well, please feel free to still put in your answer on that question. But looking at the clock, we do want to wrap up. So we know this is a long time and there's a lot to learn, but we're very appreciative of all of you who've asked questions, participated, given us your time and interacted throughout this training. We do have one more session together, and if you join us next on Wednesday, you can also get a certificate for your participation in this training workshop. Um, Moving right along, we want to extend a big thank you to our guest speakers, Maya from the Web Secretariat, and Mr. Pierre Rabukampa, CEO of the Rwanda Stock Exchange. A big thank you for your welcoming remarks and to Maya for acting as a guest speaker. Before we close, we also, oh, thank you. There's some contact information, but also the guest speaker slides. If you want any contact details or more information, from the presentation. And again, as we close, just a few words of appreciation. First of all, a big thank you to all of our SSE supporters, this group of stock exchanges and organizations committed to promoting sustainable capital markets and has made all our training work possible. As a reminder, supporters receive early access to all our training programs. If you're not a supporter and wish to be, please do email us. And we also want to extend a big thank you to our partners at IFC, Columbia University, UN Women, everyone for joining us today, sharing your expertise with all of our partner exchanges. And of course, again, a big thank you to everyone who joined. We hope you learned something and we hope to see you in the next session. But have a great day, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
All right. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Pierre. Thank you so much for hosting us. See everyone on Wednesday.